That's because of podcasting is everything to me. So I tripled down on the podcast and I saw my growth accelerate. Not just because I was putting myself out there in a different way, and because in a podcast you can become very intimate with your listeners. A lot of people doing it now, so how am I going to stand out? But I think that's true with anything, not just podcasts, but blogging and YouTube and videos, and yet you still were able to do videos.
Brando, hey, let me tell you the truth. It's not about who you know, but who knows you. Brando, it's your story, you can rewrite it if you so choose. It's your life, you decide those moves. Brando, you want to talk about getting the bag? He built a 7-figure brand from scratch. Brando, it's the Brand Up Podcast, but you already know. Enough talking, bro. Let's start this show. Brando.
All right, guys. So as you probably heard in the intro already, my next guest doesn't need much introduction. But for those people that may not be familiar with you, let's say the 0.1%, do you mind giving us the 30-second version of how did you get started online? And to be honest, like how your community, and not just the podcast alone, because that's going to be the main, topic, but how your community exploded to a point that, you are who you are today, and in the most authentic way that I've ever met somebody.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate you inviting me here, and thanks to everybody who's watching. So the quick 30-second rundown, if I can do that might be a record actually, because I tend to go on. So I was laid off from my architecture job in 2008. I started a business teaching people how to pass an exam in architecture. That went very well, and a lot of people started asking me how I built this online business. So I started to share that on smartpassiveincome.com. That was back in late 2008. And that was a blog. It then turned into a YouTube channel in 2009, and then the podcast in 2010. And it was the podcast, as I was sharing this business information as I was growing, really made everything explode. And that's because of, podcasting is everything to me, because that's how I've noticed that fell.
Like now we'll keep this real because I know this is Pat style. So I'll just show you guys real quick what happened, because it's a little bit on the back end, I guess. So we were trying to have this gorilla pod going, and literally it just like collapsed in there. So we were talking about this. Hopefully we'll get the second.
Yeah, well, the reason this is funny is because I actually recently invented a product, which is a tripod that makes sure that never happens. So I saw that in the corner of my eye, so I apologize. But I love that. We love to keep it real. I do the same thing on my shows too. But in 2010, I started a podcast, and even though I was podcasting every other day or every other week, so not very often, I was blogging 3 times a week and doing YouTube videos. Every time I met people, they could not stop talking about the podcast and the stories that they heard and the lessons they learned. And I'm like, what about the blog? I blog way more. What about that? And they're like, no, we love the podcast. So I tripled down on the podcast, and I saw my growth accelerate. Not just because I was putting myself out there in a different way, and because in a podcast you can become very intimate with your listeners, and you can scale that intimacy, but because the podcast was also giving me access to people I wouldn't have normally gotten access to. So I've been able to have people like Gary Vaynerchuk on my show, Tim Ferriss on my show, who I couldn't just go up to them normally and go, hey, could I talk to you for 20 minutes? But I can invite them on my show, and ever since then, I've become good friends with them. So it becomes a great relationship tool as well. And it has provided more income for me through the courses that I've been promoting and the speaking events that I do and all those kinds of things too. So it's huge, and it's why I teach podcasting today, because I think everybody has the ability to build raving fans, especially through their voice and through podcasting. And podcasting is just getting started, dude. Like if you imagine, there are more than 500 million YouTube channels. There are more than about the same amount of blogs. There's less than 1 million podcasts right now. Like, we're still in the early days.
You kind of read my mind with the next question, because, and by the way, guys, Pat didn't even know about me mentioning this. I'm one of his students from the Power Up podcast, and I've been dabbling with launching my podcast for probably about 2 years. So I had started, the YouTube channel, but it never got it going. Yeah, it never got it going, and it never transitioned into the audio version of it. So then after I went to your course, having everything laid out, and we're like, okay, cool. It took me probably about a month altogether. Nice, dude. But then it completely changed the way that, now I can, I'm happily saying like, okay, I have a podcast now. You can literally go and see it and listen to it, of course. But you read my mind in terms of mentioning that, okay, podcast is just getting started. Well, when I went through your course, and then for even the past 2 years, I was thinking like, oh, am I too late to this? How can, like you just gave us some real powerful stats, but for somebody that's looking at the whole industry and thinking like, oh, even though it's still in the early stage, how can someone move past that fear of, oh, I'm too late to the game? I don't know if it makes sense for me to have another podcast in this niche because there are like hundreds of them already.
Yeah.
What do you think? Like, how can people move past that fear?
Well, I mean, it's true to think that, okay, there's a lot of people doing it now, so how am I going to stand out? But I think that's true with anything, not just podcasts, but blogging and YouTube and videos, and yet you still were able to do videos. Part of it's because you enjoy it, right? So that's one thing. A lot of people start podcasts just for the relationship part. They don't care if anybody listens. The fact that it gives them access to product owners, to other creators, to other big names is enough for some people. However, there are definitely ways that you can have your podcast stand out. Obviously, you have to have good content, great content. Make sure the audio quality is fantastic. A lot of people aren't going to go to that level of actually sounding decent. And the cool thing about podcasting is you don't need a ton of people listening to have some really amazing results, because the people who do listen are going to become your huge fans. The people who are going to support you, who are going to shout for you, who are going to market for you, they're going to defend you from trolls, like all those things. And when you think about it, you're like, well, how is this different than video? How is it different than blogging? Let's talk about how people consume podcasts, how and when. So do you listen to podcasts?
I'm not all day long, but every time when I go to the gym, driving, commuting.
Exactly. So when you can't watch a video, when you can't read a blog post, you are passively consuming this content, but still actively engaged in the conversations that are happening. So when you want to talk about stats again, a person watching a YouTube video, and you might know this because you've been doing a lot of YouTube, if a person if the watch time of your video is like 5 minutes plus, that's really good. Keep people on for YouTube for 5 minutes. That's good.
Sorry.
If you have a blog, keeping people on your blog for more than 3 minutes, that's pretty good time, which is kind of sad. On a podcast, you'll find that people are listening to half hour, 45 minutes, an hour and a half. There are podcasts out there like the Joe Rogan Show, which are 2.5 hours, 3 hours long, and people are listening to every single minute because they're not distracted. When a person listens to the podcast, you're in their ear, and the way to exit that is all the way in their pocket. It's not a distraction or an ad popping up or another related video. It's just they chose to listen, and they got you in your pocket, or they're on a drive, they're on the road. So you got them. You're in, and then that's how you can then build that relationship and get them to know, like, and trust you, and you can go from there.
No, that's super powerful, and I totally agree, because I'm thinking when I go to the gym for like an hour or half an hour or something like that. That time I don't scroll on my phone. I'm not on my Facebook. I'm just like earbuds on, and then boom, rock and roll. No, that's super powerful. Now, what would you say somebody just starting launching their podcast now, niche, whatever, versus going broad, and why or why not? What's your thought on that?
The riches are in the niches, which is why I say niche, because that rhymes with rich.
Yeah.
Even though it's supposed to be niche. It doesn't really matter how you say it. What matters is the more narrow you can start with your focus, the easier it is to surpass that competition, or to not even really have competitors at all, and to also become somebody's favorite faster. That's really what it's all about, becoming somebody's favorite faster. So if you're in the fitness industry, for example, and you just have a general fitness show, I mean, it has to be really, really good in order for it to stand out amongst all the other people talking about fitness right now, because it's so general. However, if you became the expert at ultra marathons, and all you talked about, all the guests on the show were only about ultra marathons, the nutritional plans were specifically for ultra marathon runners, which are like 50-mile plus marathons, then a person who is running an ultra marathon is going to go, that's the show I need to, that's my show, right? If you go to the mall, you see how many different shoe stores, right? There's like the basketball shoe store, there's the walking shoe company, there's Crocs, there's the dress shoes, there's the casual shoes, there's the kids' shoes. If you're a runner and you are serious about running, are you going to go to Walmart or Shoe Pavilion to buy your running shoes? No, you're going to go to the running shoe store, because the people there are going to know the most to help you, so you don't get blisters on your feet when you're running whatever it is that you want to run. So start narrow. Now, obviously, there's a line, right? You could be, oh, my podcast is for females that are exactly 35 years old in California who have a golden retriever that's 4 years old. Like, that's, use common sense. But if you can find a specific little miniature world that has a very specific set of problems, you create content for them. I mean, you're going to be the king of their world. And they're going to be the person that that they, whenever somebody else goes, hey, how did you do? Oh, well, you got to listen to Marian because that's like he does it this way. So become somebody's favorite. The riches are in the niches, and then from there you can expand outwardly and horizontally. But often what I find is that people will stay in their little niche because they love being that narrow, and it just is easier to create content. It's easier to find people, and it's easier to be the leader. I have another student of mine. His name is Phil. He has a podcast called Scanner School. Scanners, like those little radios that you can listen in on emergency lines and polices, like that's his hobby. He created that, and there was nobody else going to that level. Like there were electronic and tech podcasts, but he was the only one that created a scanner podcast. And he's got super fans now who are also hobbyists who are like, oh, Phil's the guy, like he gets all the business information. He has people who follow him on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram, and all of his live streams are always there. That wouldn't have happened if he just created a general technology niche.
No, I totally get it. And like relating to your talk this morning, because we are here at Reach Live in Denver, Colorado, and you were talking about you don't need millions of followers. You just need those 1,000 real fans. And that gets me to the next question, and that would be, what do you do? Do you have a strategy that you could recommend people use? All right, you launch your podcast. What's the best strategy to actually start getting fans? Are you doing a giveaway? Do you try to do collaborations? Like what would be a behind the scene, I guess, tactical?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, especially for podcasters. I mean, number one, you have to be consistent because you don't become a fan of something that is there just for a little bit. Like you are a fan of something that always shows up. That's why people are fans of sports teams, because they come out every season and you can sort of be there with them and have something to root for. Speaking of root for, give people something to root for. Have a mission, put a foot in the ground, and the more that you have like a specific stance on something, the more likely it is for a person to go, that's my guy, that's my girl. So they're going to follow you for that. In addition to that, you can build authority through association based on who it is that you have on your show. So there's a very famous podcaster. His name is John Lee Dumas from Entrepreneur on Fire. He became worldly known because he was able to invite all these amazing leaders and entrepreneurs on his show. And as by default, he himself became an amazing entrepreneur because A, he was able to collect all this amazing information, but B, people go, oh, John interviewed Seth Godin? Well, John must be great. And then now you can get access to new people to come on your show. When you ask them, maybe they wouldn't say yes before, but now you can go, oh, like, hey, I'd love to invite you to my show. I've interviewed Tim Ferriss, Gary Vaynerchuk. Like, how would you like to join those names, right? So now people are more likely to say yes. And then people, the audience, go, oh, wow, you must have something there because you have access and I don't, right? So that's another way. But I think the most important thing is to make sure that you understand the problems that your target audience has.
Brand up.